All right, so the book lays down a easy to understand 4-step process for us for how to determine how economic events impact and affect equilibrium, price, and quantity. The first step in this model is to draw the supply and demand graph before the economic event or change occurs. Our second step is to decide whether the economic change or event impacts supply or demand. Number 3, decide whether the effect causes a shift to the right or to the left and then sketch the new curve on your diagram or graph. I think I'm out of bright colors at this point. Let's go with white. And lastly, we want to identify the new equilibrium and compare to the original, which we drew in the first step, in step 1. So let's do a couple quick examples. So the first example that the book talks about is a shift in supply. So our first step, right, is to draw the existing situation. Let's try to keep our colors somewhat the same throughout the rest of this at least. So we have a demand that's downward sloping. We have a supply that's upward sloping. And our graph is not complete. We need to label our y-axis. We need to label our x-axis. We need to find where x marks the spot. And we need to draw some dotted lines and then label that P star and Q star. So we're told that excellent weather conditions during the summer impacted the price of, and we're told that the market here is salmon. So we're told there's excellent summer weather conditions. So that's great. It doesn't require me to know anything about salmon, right? Excellent means good. It means that there's going to be more production of salmon, right? And so as a result of this prompt here, the economic event, we are going to decide, number 2 is whether it's impacting supply or demand. Well, this is a weather condition, right? So again, this is why I wanted you guys to kind of think of these things as buckets, right? So we go back through and we say, okay, demand shifters. Is weather a change in the tastes and preferences? No. Does weather have anything to do with income? No. Does weather have anything to do with the population? No. A population of salmon, but not the population of consumers. Does weather have anything to do with the price of the related goods? No. Does it have to do with the change in my expectation? No. So then we go to supply. Okay, is it going to be supply? Does weather have anything to do with inputs? Yeah, to a degree, but this one really falls into natural conditions, right? Weather it falls right into that bucket of natural conditions. So we can see, yes, it is a supply shifter. So number 2, for this one, we've identified this is going to impact my supply curve. And now the third part of it is whether this causes a shift to the right or to the left. And since we're told there's excellent summer conditions, one of the things that we can do if we are having trouble, especially with supply, if we're having trouble with is it shifting in or is it shifting out, strip away the demand curve. Just draw a little supply curve thing on the side and ask yourself, given that the price for this particular good is fixed, fix the price and ask yourself, do I think that there's going to be less supply produced because of this or more supply produced because of this if I fix the price, right? So we do what's called a horizontal interpretation of the supply curve in order for us to kind of tease out what we think this shift is going to have, right? So if there's excellent summer conditions and the price is fixed, am I going to be producing less salmon or more salmon? More salmon, right? Price is fixed, excellent weather conditions. So this is going to cause a shift outwards in my supply. Is everybody clear on why that is and kind of the hack that we can do to figure that out? So just strip away the demand and fix the price and take a look at just that horizontal kind of channel within there. So now when we put it back onto the supply and demand curve, now our last part of it is identifying the new equilibrium and comparing it to the original. So identifying our new equilibrium here is going to give us P, what we call double star, and then this will give us Q double star, which means it's our new equilibrium. And to really make this as concrete as we can, we put some arrows here. We'd make sure to label that S1, and then we would probably also put some arrows over here on the side just to make it clear that the price is going to go down and the quantity is going to increase. So at the end of the day, we do all this analysis to get the conclusion that the price will go down and the quantity will go up. That's our final answer for this particular supply shifter. Questions on supply shifts? All right, one more example, and then we will do our Kahoot. Double, toil and trouble. We're going to have double shifts this time. So we are asked about the demand for pretty much for stamps, right? But we'll call it the demand for the postal services. And I'm not going to bother trying to make straight things because just getting through the stuff. So our first step is we draw the initial supply and demand curve. We want to go ahead and label that initial equilibrium that we have, P star, Q star, and we are told in the market, postal services. And so we're told that there are two things happening. So the first thing that we're told is that there's an increase in the labor compensation for postal workers. The second thing that we're told has happened is that there's an increase in the digital communication avenues and adoption. Crazy as it seems, there are still people that don't have smartphones. In fact, one of your professors who is my age just got a smartphone last year. So adoption definitely takes some time. But there's also, a large population that just doesn't have the tools. They'd rather send a letter. They'd rather pick up the phone to call for whatever reason, usually age, but sometimes other stuff. So how do we model what happens here? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this first one, increase in labor compensation. So we have to go back, and I'm not going to go up because it'll probably make the tablet break, but we go back and we ask ourselves, is this, does this impact preferences? Does this impact the number of consumers? Does this impact the price of related goods? Does this impact the expectations for the future, right? None of that stuff is impacted by the increase in the labor compensation for postal workers. Then we go to supply. Does it impact my input prices, my factors of production? Heck yes, it does, right? Labor is one of those. So an increase in the labor compensation is going to shift my supply curve, and then we ask ourselves, if it's more expensive to hire somebody, am I going to be able to produce less or more of it? Given that I'm getting the same amount of money, I'm going to be able to produce less. So anytime our material costs increase, our supply is going to shift inwards. And our last part of doing this is finding that new equilibrium price and that new equilibrium quantity. Now here's where things get tricky. There's two things happening at the same time. An increase in digital communication is going to impact one of my curves. And so again, I go through the list. Demand. Okay, is this going to impact the tastes and preferences for people sending letters? Yes, right? If you can get your phone out and send somebody a text, you're going to do that much easier. You're going to do that, 99.999 times out of 100, right? Compared to sending a letter. For the most part, I only use the post office for receiving Amazon packages and paying some bills. But even then, most bills you can pay online or with your phone these days anyways, right? So the increase in digital communication is going to cause a shift inwards of the demand curve. And now things are starting to get a bit messy on this graph, right? So we have to find S2 and D2, where those two meet. It's going to be right here and right here. Now, as a rule, whenever there are two shifts, that means we have less information about what's actually happening in the market. So if there are two shifts, that means that one of my changes in my price or my quantity is going to be unknown, just unknowable. So let's take a look at this. So when I first shifted the demand, my quantity decreased. When I second shifted the supply, my quantity decreased. Okay? Let's take a look at the price. When I first shifted the demand, my quantity or my price increased. But when I secondly shifted the supply, my quantity decreased. So my price decreased. So my price increased for the first shift, and then it decreased for the second shift. So anytime there's a conflicting arrow when you're labeling this, that means that we do not know what goes on with price. So we can only make an inference about the quantity. So we would say we don't know what happens with price, but we know unambiguously that quantity decreases, because both of those shifts result in lower quantities compared to the demand shift inward, resulted in a lower price, and the supply shift inward resulted in a higher price. So those two conflicted each other. And I think I got some of that a little backwards, so I'll clarify that first thing in class on Wednesday. Let's go do our Kahoot.